Hi, I'm James, and today I'm taking a look at this, which is the Dell Inspiron 15 5510 laptop. This is Dell's 2021 offering in the Inspiron 15-inch 5000 range, and is slightly unusual in that, unlike many of its rivals, it features the 35-watt Intel Core i5 11300H processor. This is a 35-watt chip, in contrast to the 1135G7 found in many of its rivals. What this means is that we have no increase in core count or threads, so that is 4 cores, 8 threads, but the system does benefit from a base clock speed of 3.1 GHz across all cores, or 4.4 GHz turbo. This is a relatively modest increase compared to the i5 1135G7, which sees the clock speed at just 2.4 GHz and 4.2 GHz max turbo, but could give some benefits, particularly in multi-threaded workloads. Turning our attention to the physical aspects of the machine, obviously we have our 15.6-inch display, and being a 15-inch machine, we have the numpad included on the keyboard. Nice little shortcut as well to bring up the calculator, which is a nice little feature. Being married to an accountant, I know how important numpads are to some people. The keyboard is also backlit, and we'll be looking at that again a little further on into the video. Looking from above at the lid, we can see that this machine features the platinum silver colour finish and comes in at 356mm wide, 228mm deep, and it is at its thickest point just under 18mm thick. Turning our attention to the base, and we have rubber feet to support the laptop on a flat surface and venting underneath for cooling. We also have speakers on the underside of the laptop, which are positioned here. Turning our attention to the side of the laptop, and here we see, of course, we have Dell's standard power connector. We have a HDMI 1.4 port, so not 4K 60Hz from this port. You will only get 30Hz if trying to run 4K from it. We have a USB 3.2 Gen 1 USB-A port, so capable of 5 gigabits per second transfer speeds, and this is actually, as we can see on here, labelled with a 5 alongside the SuperSpeed logo to indicate the speed. And then here we have a USB-C port. Now, depending on the exact model of laptop you have purchased, on here we can see there is a small DisplayPort logo, and that indicates that this is a USB-C port. Other models may have a little lightning logo, and this indicates that they have Thunderbolt 4 support. So this particular model does not have Thunderbolt 4 support. Also worth noting, as we open the laptop, we see that the way the hinge works on this just lifts the laptop from the surface and gives it a little bit more clearance for cooling underneath. The entire laptop chassis, I believe, is plastic, no metal on this particular model, and unlike some of the Dell models, this rounded section here is not all rubber, it just has some little rubber feet on it here. Turning our attention to the other side, and here we find our headphone adapter, a single USB 3.2 Gen 1 5 gigabits port, and a full-size SD card reader. There is no Kensington lock on this particular model. Final thing to note with the cooling, obviously there was the venting on the underside, and then this vents out through the back of the laptop here and towards the base of the screen, so you do have air coming up here over the base of the screen. Looking inside the system and starting here with the keyboard and touchpad, we can see we have this large trackpad which comes in at around 11.5 by 8 centimeters, so fairly large. This supports the Windows Precision Touchpad drivers. We have the keyboard here, which obviously, as mentioned before, has full numpad. I'm quite a fan of Dell's layouts on these. It seems eminently sensible. You do get your Windows menu key by function control, which is omitted in a lot of cases. There is your adjustable backlighting with 2 levels, obviously fairly hard to see here in a lit room, but we have dim, full and off, and your usual, so locking, volume and so on the function keys. The function keys can also be swapped in the BIOS so that they operate as F1, F2, F3, F4 and so on. However, for many people they will just leave them so they default to the brightness and home end and so on. One thing which I have also noticed, which is quite nice on this keyboard, is that although it isn't labelled as such, the function and left and right functions as home and end, and it is labelled so page up and page down will go page up and page down, but rather than having to use the home and end, and particularly if you've swapped the function keys around when you're going through a document, it's quite nice to just be able to use those keys in that way, and a feature I really miss on some laptops. Otherwise, general use I have found so far so good on this particular system. The touchpad seems to work as well as I would hope. It has a nice feel and hasn't needed any wearing in or similar. And similarly, keyboard seems to have reasonable travel. I haven't done extensive typing on the system, but I like the layout. It's much better than I find on many UK English HPs particularly, and also some Lenovo's where they do funny things with the shift and arrow keys. So as a British user, I'm very happy with keyboard layout and the general inputs. Obviously, being a standard clamshell design and not one of Dell's 2-in-1s, they do not use a touchscreen on this, so your inputs are limited to keyboard, touchpad, and no support for touch or stylus. In the top right of the keyboard, we also have the fairly ubiquitous for Dell now combined power button and fingerprint sensor. In my general use with various Dell laptops, these are pretty quick and accurate and give a good alternative to password or PIN login for the system. Turning our attention to the system specification, and obviously these will vary depending on the region and the exact model that you order, but this model is the, as I say, Core i5 with 512GB of SSD storage. And loading up CPU ID, we can see that this correctly detects that we have the i5 11300H and that we have Intel Iris Xe graphics. I believe there are also some models of this which support the NVIDIA GeForce MX 450 graphics chip, but that is not currently available on any models in the UK that I am aware of. Looking elsewhere, we have 8GB of DDR4-3200 RAM. This is in 2 DIMM sockets on the board and is installed in a dual channel memory configuration. This does give you the option to upgrade, and I believe up to 32GB of memory with 16GB modules should work. I do not know if larger capacities are compatible with this, such as 32GB to go to 64 in total. Turning our attention to storage on the system, and using Crystal Disk Info and Crystal Disk Mark here, we can see that the system is equipped with a Western Digital SN530 512GB SSD. This is a NVMe type drive, Gen 3 PCI Express, and we can see from the results with this that we have a sequential read speed of 2.4, almost 2.5 gigabytes per second, and a write speed of almost 1.8 gigabytes per second. So while this is not obviously one of the fastest SSDs available on the market, Gen 4 drives obviously are not supported by this system, and this is nowhere near the peak speed of a Gen 3 4x device, but it is still going to offer quick loading of applications and generally good performance for most users, and particularly with a system like this where you don't have a powerful discrete graphics card, and it's not like you're using a particularly high-end i7 or i9 processor. This should be a perfectly acceptable SSD for this. I believe there are 2 SSD slots inside the machine, and I will be doing a separate video looking at how this machine can be opened up to access the memory and SSD modules for upgrades. Looking at the system under load and running Cinebench R20, we can see that actually we are getting fairly good temperatures. So in the 60s generally, they did peak up in the 70s and up to 90 odd during the initial section of this workload, but that's actually because initially the system reaches around 43 watts running during the short-term high-speed turbo, and then drops back quite aggressively. So despite being a 35 watt chip in standard form, this actually runs closer to 20 watts for the majority of the test. This keeps both noise and temperature under control. There is a Dell tool here which allows you to alter your thermal settings. So by default the system runs on optimized mode. There is a cool option which, if we select this, will clamp power consumption down, as we see now, to a maximum of around 15 watts. And will allow the fan speed to increase to keep temperatures to a minimum. There is also quiet, which again will clamp you down to that 15 watt power usage, but do the opposite, so allow slightly higher temperatures but to try and reduce noise. And finally there is an ultra performance setting where it will allow for higher noise and higher temperatures, but will increase the power limits. Now interestingly, having selected that, it still seems to stop around 20 watts, and actually this means the performance gain over the 1135 G7 isn't that dramatic. I found there was some improvement, but it's simply not using all the performance that is available in this chip if it was in a larger chassis. I suspect this is a choice that Dell have made just because this isn't a system which is going to necessarily be for absolute power users, and that while you are getting a bit of extra performance here, and perhaps it's something to differentiate them from other producers with having this slightly more powerful chip in it, it just doesn't use that power all the time. We can see here actually, as it's reaching the end of the test, it is increasing further, but we can also hear there is a corresponding increase in noise, so that ultra performance probably isn't going to be a useful mode for most people most of the time. I have had a better run running the entire test in ultra performance mode, and this did give a result around about 20% higher than I experienced on the 1135 G7. Turning our attention to the screen and just using a slideshow of my own images, and there are 2 options for the screen on the 5510. The basic model, which is what we have here, which is a 1080p 250 nits display with a 45% NTSC colour gamut. Now, to me, this is acceptable for general use. It is a WVA type display, so if we cut to the footage, we will see there is not much in the way of colour shift, even at fairly extreme angles, looking from above and moving to the side. So even if you're not sat dead square in front of the machine, you shouldn't have any real issues with viewing angles. There is also a higher specification panel on some models. Here in the UK it is only on the significantly more expensive i7 model, which is around £800 before discounts, whereas this model was £550. But that version features a 300 nits brightness display and a 100% sRGB colour gamut. So no 4K options on this model, purely 1080p, but there is that higher specification panel available. Both panels are WVA type, They are matte finish, so anti-glare. No touch options available because there are no glass-fronted glossy panels available. Turning our attention to the speakers, and obviously it's fairly hard to judge these on video. You are limited by my recording equipment and also, compression on YouTube and the speakers that you are listening through. My personal opinion is they are a little tinny. I believe we have a pair of speakers with 4 watts output each, and as previously noted, they are projecting down towards the surface that the laptop is sat on. There is a reasonable amount of volume to them, and they can obviously go down pretty quiet as well. They will be adequate for, again, general usage. This is not going to satisfy someone who is after high-end audio playback, but for general usage, YouTube, light gaming, Zoom calls, and so on, I don't see these as being a problem. They are fairly standard fare. They are probably not as good as you'll find in some of the HP systems with B&O branded speakers on them, but they are certainly acceptable. In terms of battery, we have a 54 watt hour 4-cell unit in here, and this gives, according to Windows estimates while I've been using the system, anywhere between 4 and 10 hours depending on what I have been doing. I haven't done formal battery tests on this because I haven't used the system enough yet, but I would expect it to be somewhere between these two figures. The Dell Power Manager software also gives some useful information. Besides using the thermal management for either performance or noise or so on, we have a battery extender mode which allows us to limit CPU performance, screen brightness and so on to maximise battery life. Some options for charge scheduling to make sure that the system is charged for use during the day and try and improve battery life over time, or minimise battery degradation over time. And on the main information page we also get information on battery health so that we can see as the battery life degrades and help recognise when a replacement may be needed. In terms of webcam and microphone, and well, you should be able to hear and see what these are like. The webcam is a 720p 30 frames per second, fairly standard sensor, so no 60 frames per second shooting, no 1080p output. It's what you would expect at this price point, and fairly standard even across sensors on higher end laptops. 1080p is still relatively uncommon on a laptop sensor. The detail isn't fantastic. You can probably see that on here. We're in a fairly well lit room, but you don't get much in the way of fine detail. I haven't tried this outside in sunlight, but I wouldn't expect it to be dramatically better. Likewise, the microphone output is acceptable. It's going to be fine for your Zoom calls and so on, but I wouldn't want to be producing these videos on it. We also have a physical shutter which can be slid across the camera lens on the bezel, and we have dual array microphone inputs either side of the webcam. Unlike some laptops that I have used recently, there is no function key to either mute the microphone or disable the webcam. So if you want to do that quickly, you're going to have to be muting the microphone in software and relying on that physical shutter over the camera lens, which is absolutely fine. But in some cases I've seen it where it actually disables the device and blocks applications from accessing it at all. In terms of the Windows install itself, the system comes with Windows 10 Home, and I believe that is across the range of machines here in the UK. Pro would be on Dell's business range of model machines. And we get the 20H2 version of Windows 10, so there will be an update available for 21H1, but this is not far behind the curve. In terms of pre-installed software, you do get, obviously there are some bits that I've installed as we can see on the desktop for demonstrating the system. but we do get the usual arrangement of Dell support and update software. The power management is probably the one that I would keep from here. Dell Update is useful in terms of grabbing latest drivers and firmware updates, but again, you can use that when you need it. It doesn't need to be running all the time. We then have your Dropbox promotions and McAfee, which I would just be putting straight in the bin. It pops up every time I plug in a device and so on, and I would not recommend using it. As I say that, Dell Support Assist informs me it can update drivers. You do get a few Dell interruptions, and personally there is nothing here so egregious I would be reformatting the laptop, but I would probably be going through and removing some of these because I don't want partner promos and constant driver update pop-ups on my machine. So overall, what is my opinion of the Dell Inspiron 5510 laptop? Well, it's taken me a while to do this review, largely because I wasn't really too sure. The list price on it isn't especially low. It's over £600, I believe currently £650, but there are discounts available that bring that down to around £550, I believe it is, on the Dell website currently. For a laptop with a 512GB SSD, that's perfectly reasonable, and 8GB of RAM is acceptable at that as well. 16GB would be nice, but there are upgrade options and there are higher spec units available through the Dell website. Even so, I was a little disappointed that the i5-11300H didn't offer more consistent high power mode operation. This would hurt the battery life, and 54 watt hours, while a reasonable size battery, is not huge. You do see 1890 on some 15-inch laptop models. Likewise, the screen, it's a shame really that Dell don't offer that 100% sRGB panel across more of the range. The additional brightness and colour accuracy would be nice to see. But at £550 with the 512GB SSD, the ability to upgrade the machine if you choose to in future, which some manufacturers are not allowing, going to soldered RAM, it's nice to have. So while it wouldn't necessarily be a you must buy this laptop right now, I think it's a solid choice. I approve of a lot of the decisions Dell have made. I just question really, I wouldn't pick it because of the i5-11300H over another machine with the i5-1135G7. It just doesn't offer that much. It will hurt battery life a little bit, and the performance gains are there but not huge. Anyway, I hope you found this video interesting. Do hit like if you have, subscribe if you'd like to see more videos as I post them, and any questions, ask them in the comments below. Thanks for watching.